This is Dateline News and Conversation. The topic tonight is the Ukrainian diaspora in Canada. I've been wanting to do a story about this for just about a year now, maybe more than a year. A year ago in February, Russia began its special military operation in Ukraine. And there's been so much fake news, so much lies and US propaganda that I've been wanting to do a show with somebody and a journalist from Canada. My guest tonight is exactly that. He's been involved in media for all of his career. He's a journalism graduate. And we're going to talk to my guest tonight, Rick Walker. Rick, welcome to the show.
It's my honor and privilege to be here. Thank you for allowing me to join you tonight.
Well, I'm grateful to you. I want to talk with you tonight about a number of things, politics in Canada, but my real interest was finding somebody in Canada who could talk to me about the Ukrainian diaspora in Canada. Canada is part with the United States of NATO. Canada has been very involved in sending money and military equipment and ammunition to Ukraine. And so the topic of Ukraine is really important for people to understand around the world. I personally have been to Odessa in Ukraine, and I have seen with my own eyes these far right-wing groups and neo-Nazis. I saw them with my own eyes. It is well known in this part of the world, and I'm living in Russia, in Yalta, that there are neo-Nazi battalions, several of them. The most infamous is the Azov battalion. Yep. But what is not known, Rick, is this large Ukrainian diaspora in Canada. What can you tell me about these people? And I think they're in great numbers, and the influence they've had on the politics of the Canadian government.
I would say that it is subtle. It is underground largely. Even growing up, I was never really in tune with it or aware of it much, but it's certainly there. It is, it's an influence that has been there, I think, since World War II. Just as the United States recruited the brains of what was left of the Nazi regime after World War II, so too did Canada. And Canada, being so close to the United States, it's really in many respects a political extension of the United States, both by geography and just through political reality. Canada, you hear about Operation Paperclip. Well, that certainly was a true thing here in Canada as well, where scientists, doctors, the most, influential and the people who are driving technology and innovation in Nazi Germany and Ukraine, they were recruited and they were given, I would say, amnesty after World War II to relocate to Canada. And so there were actual Nazi war criminals who ended up moving to Canada and sometimes changing their names, forging new lives here, living like everybody else and just living among us, but actual Nazi war criminals and fascists who were flying under the radar here with the knowledge of the government in both Canada and the government in the United States. And that's just been the reality here in Canada for many decades since World War II.
Wow.
In fact, I covered a war crimes trial at one point, as these people were exposed over time, and that's been an ongoing thing for some people who are concerned about it, and it's a very real thing that most people just don't think about much here, but it is there.
Yeah, well, I was very familiar with Operation Paperclip for quite a number of years now. I've done quite a bit of research on all of that, but I had no idea that the same thing happened in Canada. This is a completely new revelation for me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have heard that there are monuments in cemeteries and in other communities across Canada to Nazis. Can you confirm any of that, Rick? I mean, do you know of this?
It is true. Again, it's a very subtle thing. Canadians, like Americans, I think, live in a state of innocence. We've been insulated here because of the oceans on each side. And even though we sent troops to fight in World Wars I and II, and in the Korean War, and we've sent troops to fight in all of these wars, largely the population is politically ignorant when it comes to international politics. And it's not through any fault of their own. It's just that the schools don't teach it well enough, and we're not exposed to what's going on in Europe or Asia or other parts of the world because we've been insulated, protected in that way. And I guess ignorance is bliss. But if you go into cemeteries, if you go into certain communities, you will see symbolic references and even statues, or in cemeteries, you'll see references to Nazism, fascism, even today. So it again, it is absolutely there. And even our deputy prime minister has been photographed with a Stepan Bandera banderite. I would call it a scarf, just recently. And that came out, and her family has ties to Ukraine, and her father, her grandfather, ties to actual Nazi Germany. This is something that has been embarrassing to her, but it's something the mainstream media has largely been trying to ignore. But it's very much a reality, and she has ties to Ukraine. She's studied, went to school in Ukraine. She practiced journalism, and in some of the work that she has done as a journalist, I think attempts to flip the script on fascism and the crimes and atrocities that were committed by the Nazis in Ukraine during World War II. And you can look all of that up. It's a real thing. She tries to, in her work, rewrite that history.
Well, we're talking about Chrystia Freeland,
That's right.
who's the deputy prime minister. I was well aware of her. There's been enough out there on the internet that really documents her life. My question is, how did she ever rise to power in the Canadian government? She's deputy prime minister under Justin Pretty Boy Trudeau. How did she get there?
Her family has been a family of prominence and influence. They have money. Again, it's a family, though, that I think has, until now, it's been there. It's been a family of influence, but not really prominent. But she, coming from a family with money, she traveled the world. She was schooled internationally. She went to school in Europe, in Ukraine. She's, studied in New York. She has a home in New York. She also has a home in Ottawa. She's not really what I would call a typical Canadian. She's really an international figure, an international person with a globalist background, a globalist lifestyle. I would say she is a globalist. And in my estimation, that's the modern way of describing what a fascist would be. And if you look at the way the Canadian government operates today, I would say that its style is very fascistic, and its economic policies are very fascistic and authoritarian as well.
Well, that's the conclusion that I came to. It was not the Canada that I knew when I was there.
Mhm.
From
I don't
1960.
recognize my own country anymore,
Yeah,
quite frankly. I really don't.
same thing with me with the United States. I don't recognize it. It's an incredible phenomenon. Um, well, was this Chrystia Freeland handpicked by Trudeau, or was she kind of placed there by other powerful forces?
No, I'd say that she rose to her position through the Liberal Party of Canada. And I'm not intimately involved or familiar with the inner workings of the Liberal Party, but they are extremely powerful. And I would say that the party, had their eyes on her. They had their sights set on her. You can see how she started with, the right education, went to the right schools, uh, did work in journalism for just the right publications like the New York Times, and then entered politics and then quickly rose through the ranks. And now today is the deputy prime minister and the finance minister. And make no mistake, in Canada, when you achieve either one of those two positions, you're in position to become prime minister next, to take the leadership of the Liberal Party when the current leader steps aside at some point in the future. So she's well positioned to become the Prime Minister of Canada at some point, and many people expect that will be the case.
Wow. Uh, I guess it's like in the United States. The vast majority of people in the United States don't recognize what's happened to their government. They
Yeah.
don't realize that it's really become an authoritarian dictatorship. And some people are calling it a banana republic.
Yes. Yep.
And so to see a similar thing happening in Canada, it's really sad for me to think about that. Justin Trudeau. Um, wow. In my eyes, uh, he was such a disappointment.
Yes.
I said, and I published something at the time when he became the prime minister. I said, he's a Trojan horse. He reminded me of Barack Obama, a pretty boy. Everything he said was nice, but when you look at what he did, it was the exact opposite. I think Barack Obama was one of the worst presidents in the history of the country, far overshadowing Joe Biden or Trump or any of these people. And I get the same impression with Justin Trudeau, but I think he's mediocre. I don't think he's a great intellect. Uh, I do think that he's being controlled like all the rest of the politicians in
Yep.
most of the West. I want to ask you this. It's fairly well known that Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, has had what he calls kind of a leadership institute. And many of the people today, and many are women who have risen to the status of prime minister in New Zealand, in Sweden, and she was just dumped in the recent election. But other politicians, men and women, uh, Klaus Schwab claims they've been through his leadership program. Do you think that either or both Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau were groomed by the Klaus Schwab cabal?
100% for sure. Yes. They are World Economic Forum members. Chrystia Freeland is on the board. She, in my opinion, has a direct conflict of interest in that regard. She's, I think, serves at the pleasure of the WEF, and Canada is really there for her secondary consideration. I think she puts, well, it's pretty clear she puts WEF and globalist political objectives at the forefront, and Canadian concerns really are not not paramount for her. And if you look at what Justin Trudeau has said as soon as he was elected, he described Canada as the world's first post-national state, a signal to the WEF and the globalists, the globalist elite leaders, that Canada was on board and really taking a leadership position in terms of implementing this globalist agenda that the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, even the UN, they have they've identified. If you look at Agenda 2030, if you look at the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, all of these things, they've become the goals of the Canadian government. And Justin Trudeau is, I think, almost like their poster child. He's like, he's Klaus Schwab's shining example of what the leader of a country should be, because Canada has really given up much, if not all, of its sovereignty already to these globalist entities like the World Economic Forum. And that is because of Justin Trudeau signing off on all kinds of different agreements which essentially gives control over a lot of different policies to international organizations, including organizations that are an extension of the WEF or the World Health Organization. So he's absolutely there. And we know Klaus Schwab has even made reference to the fact that at least half of all the cabinet ministers in the current sitting Canadian Liberal government are members of the World Economic Forum. So they exert extreme influence over what is going on in Canada right now.
Yeah, and it's going on all over the world. In Australia, New Zealand, how far away is that? Way down there in the South Pacific.
Yes.
It's going on all across Europe with all of these elected prime ministers, presidents, and most of these people in the European Union who've not been elected by anybody. And when you look at what they're doing, it becomes very clear that it is all coordinated and it is all in the spirit of the World Economic Forum, or they've been influenced by it.
You're so right. And it became so clear when the pandemic hit, because their strategies, their objectives, their slogans, their campaigns, everything was the same all the way around the world, including marketing campaigns that used phrases like "build back better," right? It's too consistent to be a coincidence.
Yeah. Well, I arrived here in Russia 1 week before the pandemic and the lockdowns were enforced. So that's 3 years now. And my first thought was exactly what you just said. The way this thing was rolled out all across most of the planet, all of the slogans, all of the enforcements, the lockdowns, the shots, the emphasize, you better get it or you're going to die from this terrible COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2. My God, I said immediately, this isn't how a pandemic happens. No. Okay. This is a very sophisticated and coordinated agenda. And it's proving itself to be that. But unfortunately, as you and I both know, most people are still oblivious to it. I wonder if you agree with me.
100%. Yes.
I think the purpose of COVID was the mandatory lockdowns, how they got everybody to be forced to be locked down. Here in Russia, people over 65, and I'm one of them, were encouraged not to leave home, not to go out of your house. Get somebody to go to the market for you, get somebody to go to get your medicine, but don't go out of the house because you're most vulnerable. I paid no attention to that. Nothing was enforced. But to get into a clinic of any kind, of medical clinic of any kind, to get into a grocery store or to get into a shop where you needed to buy something, You had to put on the mask or they wouldn't serve you. Today, in Yalta, in the Crimea, and I'm sure it's the same way everywhere else in Russia, you may see one mask out of 1,000 people. And who knows, maybe it's not that they're afraid of COVID. Maybe it's because they're afraid of air pollution or they're afraid of, I don't know, disease or germs. But it was really incredible how they got everybody to obey, most everybody to obey. There were some of us that didn't. Anyway, this has been very enlightening for me, and I'm sure it's going to be very enlightening for the people that are watching this show, because I've not had a conversation like this from somebody from Canada, and it really is the first time that we are confronting this globalist agenda. All right, I want to talk. I should have done this at the very beginning of the show. Your background. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up, your education, and then your working career, and how you got to be where you are today.
Started making Super 8mm films when I was 9 years old because I bugged my parents to buy me a used Super 8mm movie camera. And from there, I never really had a plan, but I just always ended up coming back to anything related to media. So I ended up going to school to study journalism, politics, economics, moved on from there and wound up working I was very fortunate. I got to work in mainstream media, learned a lot of my craft from some very smart, well-established, prominent journalists in Canada who are old school. So, my grounding is very much old school journalism, where you're trying to not inject your opinion into things, but trying to present all sides of a story. I carried that forward throughout my career working in mainstream media, 25 years at CTV, plus other years working in radio and a little bit in print, mostly broadcast though, and doing some other things. Wound up leaving for a variety of reasons, largely because I was getting frustrated with the way media was being controlled more by, I would say, the politics of the country and even the government, as media companies were being bought out and controlled more and more with government money. So I was becoming increasingly frustrated on the editorial side, where I could see that kind of editorial control was being exerted. So I ended up leaving. I've become an independent producer since then, was doing a lot of automotive journalism. And when the pandemic hit, I knew that I had to resurrect an online news channel that I had been dabbling with and had established really in the early days of YouTube. It never got any traction with it because it was just honestly too early in the development of that technology to really do anything with it at the time. I was too far ahead of the curve with it. So it was good that it was sitting on the back burner, because all I had to do was just go over, click a few buttons, turn that thing back on. And when the convoy, the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa hit, we were ready to roll with that channel, and it instantly exploded. And we got so many subscribers and so many people watching around the world that it became a very useful tool, a counterbalance, if you will, to the mainstream media coverage and narrative that flowed from that event. And I think we were able to provide, and have continued to provide, a more realistic account of what is going on out there, not just the government bought and paid for mainstream media narrative.
Wow. Your parents giving you that old movie camera, very similar to my story. I was about 10 years old, and my parents gave me a Kodak Brownie camera,
Right.
a black and white film in those days.
Yeah.
And I can remember taking pictures in the neighborhood and having my mother take pictures of me and my dad playing catch in the yard. And then I went to high school, and my parents bought me a Kodak camera, and I started taking pictures, and I became the school photographer, and that continued through college and my postgraduate. And my mother taught me to type on an old Smith Corona mechanical typewriter when I was in 7th grade. And I started making up stories and writing stories. And I guess the rest of my life has been not formally in journalism, but I taught high school journalism, photojournalism, and yearbook in a high school in Tucson, Arizona for 6 years.
Oh.
And I had several $1,000s worth of photographic equipment, darkroom equipment, the whole bit. And when video became affordable, I knew that this was the most powerful communications medium known to the human race. And I had to get into it, and I did, and ended up doing what I've been doing for the last 15 years or so, is documenting protest. I documented the Occupy movement in Portland, Maine. I was back where I was born and raised in Waterville. And from there, I ended up making 3 historical documentaries exposing the dark side of American history from the very beginnings through all of its wars and its invasions, color revolutions, coups d'etats all over the world. And so I really became radicalized, and I learned that what we're doing, alternative media, if you want to call it that, is an effective way, not effective enough, because the other side is so powerful, so wealthy. You know, the propaganda is a huge wall that is almost impossible to penetrate. But each of us are trying to do our own part. Now, I want to ask you this, because I know that you have been producing a show called Maverick News. Tell me about that. When did it begin? How did you get the idea, Maverick? I mean, that's something like Maverick, you know, the movie.
Yes.
Top Gun, you know, different. I mean, I'm standing out. Tell me about it.
Well, my name is Rick, so it has my name in it. But it's also because when I started my multimedia company many years ago, when I was still actually working in mainstream media, my dad called me a maverick because I was always doing things different than other people, always just a little bit out of step, never afraid to take risks. So I ended up calling the business, my company is Maverick Multimedia Incorporated. And then I started that news channel online, Maverick News, in the earliest days of YouTube. But I barely understood the medium at that point. Very few people did. I didn't even really understand how to properly upload the videos and put proper descriptions in for them and so on. But I've done a variety of programming since then, a lot of automotive programming and television production over the years. But that news channel it never got traction in the earliest days. So I put it aside because I couldn't figure out how to monetize that, how to make it viable in any fashion at all. And then years later now, fast forward, 15 some years, and the pandemic hits. And I said to my friend Brendan, you know, let's do something with this channel that I have. We need to provide a counterbalance to the mainstream media. And when we saw that convoy heading to Ottawa, I said, we have to do something. Like, we can't just sit back. The mainstream media is spinning this completely out of context. And so we used the channel to do exactly that. We picked up live streams, we broadcast constantly, and it's evolved from there. And I've just turned it into a sort of a new generation, a new kind of news program, streaming in this new form of journalism.
So that's really exciting and amazing. I have to tip my cap to you. Kudos. You've been, as you said, ahead of the curve. So Maverick News, okay. I mean, I guess it must have really kind of exploded with the convoy, the Freedom Convoy. That was covered all over the world.
Yeah.
was covered in the United States, and it got a lot of people excited that, wow, this might bring about the revolution that a lot of people were hoping for.
Yeah.
But now that that's over and the pandemic's over, what types of news are you covering? Are you covering just Canadian news? Are you covering geopolitical topics? Tell me a little bit about that, and who collaborates with you on this show?
It's been a very interesting journey. It's a new form of journalism. It really is, and I think you're practicing the same kind of journalism yourself. So it's every day is a new learning experience. We cover the world, and we do, and I do it all from right here in my small studio, and the internet allows us to do that. So sometimes we have people that we collaborate with who are out there with cameras in the field. We can pick up streams from different sources all over the globe, and then we can comment on it. We can do exactly what we're doing right now. I'm collaborating with you, Regis, right? So that we're engaging in this conversation from different parts of the world in real time. And we're able to cover news stories in real time. And when I'm covering the most interesting thing that I think I've experienced in the last few months is that when I'm covering something, even as an investigative piece, sometimes it elicits a response from some of the players within the story that I'm covering, and they'll actually respond in real time while I'm on the air to what I have just reported, and they'll want to come on if they feel that, and they'll contact me in real time, and we'll put them on the show immediately to get that response from people, so that the story actually unfolds. It's not like it would be in the past where we would have to make contact and then, maybe the next day get comment from somebody. Sometimes it's like right then and there, live on the air. Some newsmaker here's what I'm talking about. They maybe get upset, or they feel that they need to comment on it. And the next thing you know, they're contacting me online, and they say, I want to come on and I want to respond to that. And I'm like, that's great. Let's get the other side of that story and put them on immediately. And you never know what you're going to get when you do that, because it's not scripted, it's real time. And so the stories actually unfold in real time while they're on the air with you. It's been a very interesting experience.
Well, I have not been able to get well enough acquainted with live streaming, but I'm close to it now, because I realize, and I've realized for a long time, that real-time interaction with your audience is extremely important. You've talked about some of the benefits to you that
Yes.
people have contacted you and said, wait a minute, let me come on the show. I want to talk about, this or that, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I have to take my hat off to you. I think that's really great.
And that is exactly the key to the whole thing that you've touched on right there. It's about building a community. It isn't about me. When I was working in television and radio, it was really me speaking to the audience. Now I'm actually integrated into the audience. The audience is integrated into the show. That's why I have a call-in portion of the program most nights, where the audience can call in. There's also the chat room, which has become a community. And I refer to them as the Maverick family, because a lot of them are there every single night. They interact with each other. They really do become a community, a family of people. And our platform is dedicated to freedom of speech, freedom of expression, free media. And so that's our focus, and ethical and journalistic standards. But our audience is very much into that. And so it's about community, and they interact with the show. I interact with them. And that's why I say it's a new form of journalism as well, because in the past, when I was practicing old school journalism, it was like I would never inject my opinion into a story ever. That was not what my job was. It was to go out, collect all the different elements of the story, present all sides, give everybody, all the stakeholders, a platform to share that platform, and let the public decide based on a balanced report. Today, though, I still endeavor to do that, but I will inject my opinion because the audience gets to offer up their opinions by calling into the show or participating in the chat room. And so I also inject opinion, but I'm always clear about it, that I'm injecting editorial opinion at that point. So there is still separation, but I'm not afraid to speak my mind and offer up some perspective. And I think it's valuable in that way because as a journalist collecting the information, it adds new and broader context. And it's also necessary because we're getting that public input instantly, with people offering their opinions. Where in the newspapers of old, and still today, print publications, they would have letters to the editor, and then you would have an op-ed section, an opinion editorial section for the newspaper editorial staff to act as a counterbalance to the public input and editorials. And then you would have the regular stories. So we're kind of taking all of that and creating this new form of news program online.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm really impressed with what you've created. I'm a little bit envious, but then on the other hand, I'm not, because I have created a community with what I've been doing from the beginning of my first documentary film, The Ghost of Jeju, back in 2012. Two other historical documentaries have really been exposing American adventures throughout the world, imperialism, etc. So they haven't been popular with the mainstream media. But when I first came to Russia, I came here to finish a film, which was called 30 Seconds to Midnight, because I was afraid of a nuclear war between Russia and the United States. And I had to come here to find out for myself what Russia and Russians were like. And my eyes were wide open. And I've come back 3 more times. And I've been living here in Yalta now for the last 3 years. My focus, and people say, well, why don't you interview people from the other side? And I go, why should I do that? Because the other side has built this enormous tsunami of propaganda, a wall that's impenetrable. They've had their chance to craft their narrative. My focus now is to present what I have discovered about Russia and life in Russia, the history, the culture, the people, to those non-believers, those people who have been propagandized. So I'm really not in the business of traditional journalism. My focus really has been to counter the propaganda that's coming from the other side about Russia in the pursuit of understanding and peace. Anyway, that's just a little personal note, and I make it very clear whenever I'm asked, and that, this isn't a news show. This isn't balanced reporting. I'm not an asset of the Kremlin. I'm not a Putinista. I'm an American who has had an awakening. And before it's too late, I hope to be able to awaken some other people. So let me ask you this question. I know that you're not alone in your programs. Do you do programs like on your own, like you're talking about, or do you have other people that are partners or guests?
Oh, of course. Many nights I'm on by myself and I'll just talk. I'll go over the news of the day. There are occasional evenings when I come on and on a rare occasion, I'm not sure what I'm going to end up talking about. And those have been some of the best shows, honestly, when I just start to speak from the top of my head and start to talk about politics usually. But I often have guests on. It has been a process, a learning process for me as well, because just like you, the live streams where I've been able to bring guests in, other international journalists like Eva Bartlett or John Mark Dugan or Scott Ritter, they bring a new perspective and they open my eyes and give me insight into what is happening globally. And just like you, I've taken on, I have a new perspective and a new appreciation for what is going on in other countries, where working for CTV for all of those years, even as a journalist, you think that you're getting a broad perspective. I mean, I covered economic summits with world leaders, but back in those days, pre-internet, you're still insulated. You're there's a buffer there where you're not really getting, you don't know what's going on in Russia. You don't know what's going on in China. The internet has changed everything, and I've been exposed to so much that my worldview has expanded exponentially. And I'm so grateful for that, because I now see some of the truly evil things that our government has done around the world, that the US government has done around the world in our name with our tax dollars, the billions of dollars that have been sent to Ukraine for this crazy war that never had to happen, the way that they've tried to expand around the world this elitist, globalist, liberal hegemony that just, they kept pushing closer and closer to Russia's border with NATO, and now into Ukraine. And now they're sitting right on Ukraine, or on Russia's doorstep with Ukraine. So I see what's going on, and I see that the real problem, and this is just my opinion, but I see that the real problem is right here at home. It isn't. I think we've provoked all of this, and I think Joe Biden is a very stupid man. I think this is extremely irresponsible, and we now sit on the verge of World War III, possible nuclear. Well, I think we're in World War III, but on the edge of a possible nuclear conflict, and all of this could have been avoided through some simple common sense and if someone had had the political will to try to get along with other people in other countries around the world. I'm not afraid of China. I'm not afraid of Russia. Why the government has to keep pushing is beyond me. It's just resulting in a lot of death and destruction, and I'm totally opposed to it.
Yeah, it's a challenge to the Anglo-Saxon hegemony, their power, their influence, their money, their greed. So before I go any further, how can people find you? How would they find you on the internet?
Well, we have our YouTube channel, of course, and Rumble. If you just go to MaverickNews.CA, that's our website, and you can watch the programming right there. And you have links from that, of course, to the various social media platforms as well. We're on like Twitch and Cloud Hub and Gab, but mostly YouTube, Facebook. Those are the two big ones. And actually, YouTube, Facebook, Rumble. Those are the three main platforms that we are on, and growing quickly on Rumble because of all the censorship that's taking place on YouTube. It's sick.
Yeah, I know all about that. So people can find you on any of these platforms, MaverickNews.CA.
Yes.
Canada.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's really great, because I hope that more and more people will be inspired to follow you. Now, I want to ask you about Lori. How is Lori? How did you connect with Lori? She's quite an interesting person, but
Yes.
She's often a co-host, or she's involved in discussing geopolitical issues. Tell me about that.
Well, I think she's fantastic. She really found me. I think she started watching the program when the Freedom Convoy took root. And then she started to phone into the show during the call-in portion. And she was so bright and offered such great perspectives on things that I would sit there and hope that she would phone in, because I wanted that intelligence injected into the show some nights. And just over time, she drifted into a place where she occasionally appears on the program and contributes, and she brings suggestions for guests, and she has great contacts, and she also has an extensive background in journalism, and it's actually pretty impressive. And she has a pretty extensive network of contacts out there. So I'm grateful to her for all of the help and everything that she has brought to the table.
Yeah. Well, I want to put your where people can find you, MaverickNews.CA, in the description. I'm sure they can find you on Rumble, on Twitter, on Facebook as Maverick News, correct?
Yes, that's right.
They could search for you that way.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Are you an independent journalist now? Are you funded by anybody? By anybody, I mean a sugar daddy, a corporation. Do you rely on financial support from your viewers?
Yes, that's the only way we are sustained. I stopped pursuing sponsors even for my automotive television program a few years ago. Now that's entirely supported, even through the television networks that we're on, and I self-syndicate, but it's just the royalties that we get from that pay for that program. And then the news aspect of it, the news Maverick News operation, that is entirely funded by monetization through YouTube and the viewers who donate. And the monetization through YouTube and Rumble is almost nothing, because a lot of the subject matter we deal with is considered to be controversial. As a result, most of the content is demonetized. So we don't get anything from YouTube because of that. And Rumble, there isn't enough money over there to shake a stick at. So it's almost non-existent. It's strictly pretty much the donations that come in from the viewers who support what we do. That is it. And on the news side, I have actually turned sponsors down because I don't want to be compromised in any way. Not to say that I wouldn't accept some sponsorship, but I would be very careful about any company that I would bring on board in that regard, because I don't want even the appearance of any conflict of interest there at all. And so that's it. Like, I've been reluctant to even sell T-shirts on the show. People keep asking for them. So for the first time, we're going to start to sell some T-shirts, but I don't really want to get into too much of the commercialization of the news program. I really want to avoid it because I feel like I am so free right now. I'm one of the very few journalists out there who can honestly say that I am not controlled by anyone at this point. I don't take orders from anybody. Nobody dictates my content, not the viewers, not the there's no sponsorship, there's no government influence, there's no television network that tells me what to put on. It's entirely what I decide to cover. And my rule of thumb now, as it always has been, is to always try to do what is in the best interest of the public.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I when I first started making documentary films, um, I didn't have the money. I was retired and living on a small pension,
Yeah.
and I wanted to remain independent. But in order to travel, um, I've been down through the Pacific on 2 occasions, extremely expensive. Didn't have the money to do that. But a lot of people I approached and I said, can you help support my effort to create this particular film? This is what it's about. This is where I need to go. And whatever you contribute will only go towards my transportation, travel expenses. And in the beginning, it was a couple of pieces of equipment that I needed. And I've maintained that independence ever since. I've never taken a penny for myself. I had 16,000 followers, which is not that many, but for someone like me doing what I was doing on YouTube, that was pretty good.
Mhm.
that whole account has since been permanently deleted. You talk about censorship, they didn't like some of the content. But anyway, I've always felt like you that I had to maintain my independence so I could make films that told the story I wanted without any sanitizing, without anybody else editing. And it goes the same thing now with the show that I produce. I determine the content, I determine the guests. And as you said, I've had the same thing happen. People have contacted me and said, "Why don't you get a hold of so and so and so and so?" Or "I'd like to come on your show." And so it's been very interesting. I'm not going to try to change what I do. It's what I do. I'm not at all doing what you're doing. Uh, I'm not even capable of doing that. But I am so busy now with doing 5 or 6 of these video podcasts a week. Plus, I'm producing, I don't know, I've got a whole list of things that are already in the production line, documenting the history, the culture, and life in Crimea and Russia. And I have to tell you, I have never been so busy and so energized as I have been since I've come to live in Crimea for the last 3 years. Uh, so I think what we're both doing is similar but different. We're using this incredible medium um, that still allows us to be free and independent and get the message out, even at the risk of being censored or punished by those powerful forces that don't appreciate what we do. Um, Rick, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I hope that we can do it again. Um, and for you and I to have conversations about these geopolitical issues that are happening at warp speed. And just before we conclude, I would like your opinion on what you see happening in terms of this rapid movement away from American imperialism, Western hegemony, towards a multipolar world being championed by Vladimir Putin and President Xi of China. What are your thoughts on what's happening on that level?
I'm excited and extremely worried at the same time. I think it's unavoidable. I think it's probably a good thing. I think it's healthy for the world to have that kind of economic diversity. I think that um, the West, the United States, has been extremely irresponsible and too aggressive in everything that it has been doing on the economic front. I don't see why you have to be number one at everything all the time. I don't see why they view China as a threat uh, just because they've been growing and becoming more powerful economically. We can live in harmony and everybody can prosper, but it's undeniable. The U.S. dollar, I think, is at the end of its life as the world reserve currency. As a result, you're seeing these wars take place. This is the United States, and by extension, Canada and the NATO countries trying to preserve their dominance globally because it's slipping away. They will not be able to preserve what they've had, preserve what we've had here. As a result, I think we're going to end up suffering because their approach to it, our government's approach to it here, is to be authoritarian about it. And I think honestly that our government here in Canada has adopted over the years since World War II, increasingly, a fascistic authoritarian ideology. You can see it in the way that our economy is managed through these public-private partnerships. You can see it in the United States and the Biden regime right now. And I think it's destructive, extremely destructive for the world. Instead of working with Russia and China and Brazil and South Africa the BRICS nations, instead of embracing a multipolar geopolitical reality, they're resisting it and trying to destroy it, dismantle it. And they won't. They can't. We can't. We should embrace it and work together, in my view, and work toward prosperity across the board. Hopefully, when this conflict is over with, we'll get to that point. But between now and then, I see Joe Biden, the Democrats, the neocons in the US, NATO, inflicting a lot of pain and suffering on the world in order for them to do what they want, which is to try to maintain their control or their perceived control over the world. And I'm very worried about it. One way or another, the world is going to change.